The last time we were taping, if you recall, I had pulled out as an example, I was using some ordinary earth-produced mythology, and I was going to continue, since I didn't finish, and use some in an expanded way. But also let me point out, if I didn't make it real clear, the examples I was pulling out, I was using some of that Norse and Christian mythology, and that's not the point. There was no sort of subtle, subconscious, subliminal hint of any kind. I was just pulling out because some of it I, in fact, could be elaborating on myself. Assuming none of you is an expert, you wouldn't know the difference. So the point was not that I was referring to certain myths or the certain apparent cultural or nationalistic myths of it being Norse. But there is a spectrum there, and I remind you again, we were talking about not some sort of cultural phenomenon. You're talking about the cellular, or I am, and you should be hearing it and pondering it yourself, the actual cellular needs of the human brain that concocts all of these stories. But just don't get involved with, in case anybody had any inclination to do so, over the particular ones I was pulling out, because instead of just calling it Norse mythology, it was, you look at it as being a spectrum of going from pagan, if we're talking about the Western world, which we are, northern pagan myths, all the way into Jewish/Christian/chivalry myths, which about wraps it up for the kind of three-dimensional extremes that I was trying to get you to consider. All right? Okay. Don't you just love prefaces and introductions? If it wasn't for that, sometimes you'd have to read the whole book. Maybe I'm just speaking for a minority of us, but I'm sure it's a very sharp minority of us. I was going to point out some more about such myths, again, using those kind of extremes of some of the Northern European pagan myths, if you look at that as being one end, all the way into Christianity, chivalry, and it's not really the religion, it's just the way at different times and different places, different cellular molecular structures of the human nervous systems needed different messages, that is, different forms of energy. Another of the specific ones that I wanted to point out, a kind of two-dimensional struggle that has useful significance if you can find it. You recall I was pointing out that there had been in the older European pagan myths that, contrary to everything from Greek mythology to Christian mythology to even Islam, but all the ideas of heaven, of the dead heroes, that is, people who lived a good life in some way, that they and everyone else will be involved with the ultimate triumph of good over evil, that is, profit over loss. But that there were these pagan myths, which I remind you again are not simply cultural or psychological or sociological stories of some kind to try and shore up the psyche of man. You're talking about absolute movements of energy that's not that far removed from people fighting one another, people making love to one another on a different level for your own circulatory system, your own breathing, that these myths are not simply sociological or psychological. They are moving energies about, and they have a specific effect on specific nervous systems. So contrary to the ones that are in the majority, the kinds of packet information belief systems now that good will ultimately win, even though you're going to die, people in the western part of the world, in fact the majority of people on this planet now, whatever their myths are, whatever their apparent religion or lack of it seems to be, the main packets of energy, belief systems, are on the basis that good will triumph. It may take dying for this to come to pass. That is, you may have to die and then things will be straightened out. But there were, and there's still traces of it in your nervous system. It still manifests itself. That's why I'm bringing it up, even though I'm referring to it as pagan, bygone myths. They're not all that bygone, by God. But those myths wherein the afterlife was not the end of it, that the afterlife was just a stalling point wherein even at the good places, and the examples I was using in the Valhalla halls of Asgard, the head gods, the good people, the good forces are simply sitting around, killing time, awaiting the day of final destruction wherein evil will once and for all, that is loss, evolution, not profit, but where evil, as the Christians and other religions would call it, wherein evil will inevitably win. The gods are going to go down, and all of the good people that's fighting with them is going to go down. There's no way out. That's to try to bring you up to date to go off into another direction from the last time. A very specific aspect of this, that is, the only possible power, the only talent, the only boon of being on the good side, since you're inevitably going to be defeated, you and the good gods. The only possible significance, the only way to look at it as being in any way powerful is in the fact to go down again, even in the afterlife, to go down fighting fearlessly in this absolute, inevitable, inescapable lost cause. That is the only real ultimate form of reward. That is the only thing approaching triumph of profit over loss, good over evil. Now, we're really up to date, if you're following. Do you see the similarity between that and what I've been describing as a kind of heroism, the only kind possible, or a particular kind possible for a real revolutionist, in that doing such as this is not involved with the ultimate triumph of some sort of new info over fragmented info. That is, the conquering being a kind of total obliteration. That's not going to happen, because on the visible level, it is still going to be the ultimate triumph of evil. That is, flawed information, ignorance, as ordinary people would want to call it. That's going to be the ultimate triumph. It always is. The flawed information is what makes the 3D world apparently move within inside the context of a larger, more complex system. So what is the only possible heroism, the only possible powerful acts that a person can do in this life? Instead of the kinds of older myths which had to do more with the red circuits, with just the physical aspects of life, instead of going down fighting, being defeated on the battlefield physically in an inescapable day of doom, is a real revolutionist. Fights fearlessly this inevitable battle of defeat, him against flawed information. And the way you do it now is to continually be struggling so that you are always thinking right to the very end more than you've got to. That is the revolutionist act of heroism. Well, the ultimate one, because I guess I got too convoluted for some of you. I'll see if I can't press it out here. Do you understand? Just at this level, don't take it as being anything very metaphorical at all, but at this level, if you had nothing else to go by, at this level, and you're left with all the information available through the senses, no more, no less, it's all that's needed to live and die at this level. But at this level, apparently, death, that is, destruction, is the final victor, because no one has ever seen anybody arise from the grave. The human nervous system tells you these myths about the Jesuses and other people that arose from the grave, but you have never seen it happen. You don't know anyone who's ever seen it happen. So at that level, which I was saying was the visible level, the sensual level, there is a defeat of loss to profit. There is likewise outside the body, beyond the body, if we're going to arbitrarily separate the two here for the sake of conversation, and we're talking about the body of the intellect, you could also say that it is inevitably going to lose in its battle to have perfect information, such as the body would like to have perfect health. Perfect health would be no death. No illness, but certainly no death. That would be the ultimate triumph of good over evil as far as the body was concerned, if we were speaking of it artificially in isolation. To the intellect, the ultimate triumph of good over evil would be for it to have complete information as opposed to flawed information. But on this planet, in this life, flawed information, that is, continually incomplete, not wrong, but continually incomplete, because if it was complete, we'd be done for. There'd be no more growth at this level. So you're faced with the ultimate triumph of ignorance, to make it real crude. That is flawed information, incomplete information. Ignorance will ultimately triumph over knowledge the same way as death will triumph over life at this level. If you begin to see that in the tales of Odin and the ice giants, that is just evil, just absolutely winning, is not all that foreign. Now, to everyone's nervous system that I have here and the ones I know of right now getting this on tape, it could be other people, but all of you people's nervous systems are wired in such a way that that idea, that is, that form of energy, is at the very least slightly foreign. It does not seem to be very nourishing. It does not seem to be very activating to your nervous system. That ultimately evil would win. That ultimately the good people, even after they die, and there they sit with the good gods, are just sitting there in a place of gloom, not of happiness and bird singing and streets of gold and lots of booze and good food and sex. Because people are just kind of sitting around staring at the floor. It's dark and it's cold. And the day is coming that they all know that they will be done for, absolutely finally defeated. Then you understand, you should get a taste of, that's not all that foreign. Not in some pessimistic sense. Because the only way that would apparently, that is visibly, offer any possibility of heroism or any kind of power of profit over loss at the 3D level would be similar to, as I was using as a springboard, the old pagan idea that, yes, evil will finally win out over good. But those who know what they're doing, those that might be real heroes, they will go down in this inevitable defeat. They will go down fearlessly and they will fight to the last second. That is their only redeeming quality. What is the only possible redeeming quality if we're not talking about simply physical acts of hostility and death? If we're talking about this, any of you who understand anything by now, which many of you do understand something by now, you understand that you are not, boy, I hope you do, you understand that you, through what you understand that may be at your own level, the privacy of your own nervous system now, which may be so extreme, which may be so much more complex than that which life is now wired and primed up those around you to think, that what they think is just child's play. It is so far removed from what you can see at times that you don't want to, you're hesitant to think about it as being actual human awareness or consciousness. But now, if you understand that much, you also understand that there's nothing you can do. Oh, maybe a few of you still have some kind of hope. That just maybe, if you say one more word next Thanksgiving or sometime to your mother or your brother when you see him again, you keep getting this feeling that, yeah, he's kind of an idiot and he always was, and he beats up on his wife and he drinks a lot and he's still taking dope. But sometimes when I see him once a year, I can say something sort of profound and his eyes will light up. Just maybe, if I keep talking to him once a year when I see him. Maybe some of you still got dreams like that, but if you still believe such as that, then you probably also believe that on the next holiday your brother's not going to give you a cheap tie for as a present. As is always necessary, you do understand I'm having to simultaneously talk at two different levels, as two different views. We're talking about how things are at the ordinary level, but then how you might see them if you weren't at the ordinary level, right? But there, you're still living at the ordinary level, but not thinking there. That is, at the ordinary level, it would appear to be that ignorance is winning. And at the ordinary level, if you knew something extraordinary and then still at the same time had one foot in the ordinary stream, the ordinary level, you would be wont to think, well, wait a minute, what I'm seeing is not selfish, it is not prejudicial, it does me no particular good, it's not my opinion, and I'm much better off for it. Well, you can't prove that. This is so much more fun that people I know, just my immediate circle of friends and family, if I could let them know, they would have more fun than they're ever getting off drugs and beating up on each other and just being ordinary. If I could just, and it's not all that complicated, so I'll just tell them. And then maybe I'll tell a whole bunch of people. Maybe I'll just write a book. Or I'll put out a pamphlet and I'll hand down the street and people will go, and I won't even sign it. I don't care. Ignorance, at that, if you're thinking still at that level, which is incomplete information, ignorance is going to win in the same way that those Northern European pagan myths said that evil is going to win. No matter what happens, evil will ultimately triumph. Flawed information, incomplete information, everything that seems to be, and then fill in your own ordinary words, stupidity, dumbness, prejudice, ignorance, hatred. It will win at that level. There's no way, there's no escaping it. That's not metaphorical. It is not psychological again. It will win in the same sense that at that level, death apparently wins. All these ideas of people, the newest version, I know there's a book out of somebody, the title, Why Good Things Happen to Bad People. I understand it was a big seller. It's just a new title to an old game, an old problem, but that's true. The best people in the world from any view, any cultural view, any religious view, the best people in the world, something terrible is going to happen to them. They're going to die. At that level, evil is going to triumph. So no matter what they do, and plus along the way, probably a lot of things that ordinary people think are as bad or worse will happen to them. Why? Well, go back and figure, there sits Odin, the God of all good. The God of all good. And you're worried about something bad happened to a rabbi, something bad happened to a priest, something bad happened to your aunt who was just a heck of a nice woman. Well, look at this. You got their head God, and something terrible is going to happen to him. He's going to get killed once and for all. No way out. Trying to do such as this, you are going to be defeated if you are looking at it that level, because ignorance, that is the very thing that is the basis of your ordinary thought. The old building site wherein your nervous system was constructed, wired, primed, and fed, yours and everyone else's, that is not going to change. And you can look at your new building site, metaphorically, is that now you have found your own form of a Valhalla, that you found this new place wherein you're on the side of good. You're on the side of profit. You're on the side wherein there are no particular sides. You can see in a more complex manner. You can think in a more complex manner. So what? You're going to die like everybody else, right? Not only that, but so what, in a certain kind of pagan, mythical, rhetorical sense, so what? Because what you know is not going to help or change what anybody else knows. That you're standing there with strangers, or you're sitting there at a holiday dinner with your own mother, your own father, your own child, and you'd like turn to them and say, hey. Just a few words, just turn around and change their whole life. And you can't. And so in that sense, you can say, well, they are, well, enough of you are getting it, but in a metaphorical sense, you could say that they are being held in the grips of this inevitable triumph of dumbness, fear, insanity, hostility, ignorance, and that you could tell them, you could now put into some words, and you could say, look, Ma, or to your own child, hey, look, listen, let me tell you this. And you can't, because ultimately, they are going to win, not them, but the power of ignorance. Apparent loss, apparent doom and destruction at the 3D level, no matter from what myths your nervous system seems to arise and even get nourishment, it still seems that way at that level to everyone. That yes, the bad guys won. The grave will get us all. Except, of course, I try to believe that my religion or these myths I follow, that even after I die, some way I'll survive it. In other words, even after we're defeated, some way we'll actually win. It's a matter. Well, if I don't want to leave this too vague, you can find other things in this. But one thing is, I wanted to point out to you, there is no cause for anyone to even have any lingering concern like you've been walking through a wool patch and you got lint all over your serge suit and you're going to carry it forever. That is, of wondering, well, is there anything I can do to go back and help my family, my friends, or humanity? Which, of course, is always a good one. That, well, I'd like to just help everyone. Just remember this. You can't. And not for some personal reason. Just remember the good old stories. For those of you, think about it. The head God, as foreign as it is, sitting there, never eats, sitting there at the head of the table, and even after all the good people on earth die and go there and join him, they find out real quick. Some way I missed the bus. I was looking for one that said, you know, the Elysian fields are paradise, heaven. How'd I end up here? What'd I do wrong? And they find, well, you didn't do anything wrong. I tried to live an upright pagan life. You did. Well, I wanted to go to the good place. You're there. And you look around and it's, you know, thousands and thousands of people sitting there, and it's cold and it's dark, and the God is sitting there. It is not some personal foible on your part. It is not some failing, but you should quit. As soon as you begin to understand, you should be able to start quitting, trying to shake your foot, or you're trying to drag along, and in some way you will ultimately going to either help people you know, or that just in some way you may help humanity. It's not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that you can't do it. The information is there. Now there is a reason that the energy behind those kind of older pagan myths seems so diametrically opposed to that which is basically now a more up-to-date, relatively speaking, of the kind of Christian, Jewish, chivalrous basis of the myths that goodness, heroism can win. There is a reason. There is a reason that that is the primary kind of food insofar as these kind of myths are concerned, that it is a primary food to people in our part of the world, and especially at our time, and that there is likewise a reason that our part of the world at this particular time is the avant-garde of ordinary, lineal civilization, evolution. It is necessary to have that kind of food because, well, you should be able to hear. Relatively speaking, listen at any most ordinary intellectual level, those old pagan myths not only sound foreign, but very pessimistic, very fatalistic. Like even if you don't consider yourself, even before you got involved with this, if you didn't consider your own basic nervous system to be very religious, you would have to say, well, even though I grew up, my family was Jewish or Baptist or Catholic, and I'm not very much involved in it, but Jesus, at least I'm glad I had that background, as opposed to if I'd grown up, you know, up in the Shetland Islands or up in northern Norway, and if I grew up and those kind of myths were in my nervous system that no matter what you do when you die, all you've done is you've gone to this big old cold place where you hang around for a while until you die again and no way out. Well, I kind of take, pardon me for putting it, but that kind of puts a chill on one's life. But that feeds something. It did, and there is still a piece of it because it is manifested in a kind of refighting, a reclothing of the old idea, the old question, as I resubmitted to you a few meetings back, a few tapings back, that even if people do not think about it, there is a continuing struggle with the question of free will. Even those who never say it, those who never think it. The excuse of how can I live like I live, the excuse of how can I be fearful, the excuse of how is it that I seem sane enough that I am working, if not necessarily for good, for profit. And yet I continually cheat myself. I continually do that which causes me a loss. I continually do that which seems to be, from an ordinary view, not in my own best interest. And why? Used to, they thought it was because that's the way things are. That's the way the gods, the anti-gods have it arranged. And now it's more a matter with most people of the nervous system saying, well, that's because of unconscious motivations in my own psyche, that is, my own nervous system. Which, if you think that's any different than being driven by the myths of Odin and ice giants and Zeus, then boy, you got a lot to learn. Either that or you got nothing to learn. The question I was going to wrap up this part with, to a real revolutionist, is once you understand in some way, in the same way that a good follower, that is somebody really being fed off those old pagan myths, that is evil, the bad forces, the forces of loss will ultimately triumph. And so I've only got one of two choices. If I'm going to approach anything such as an exercise of any sort of power, since I am inevitably going to go down to defeat, that is, I am doomed, I will go down fighting. No doubt about it. Then the real revolutionists understand that if this indeed was a parallel or metaphorical sort of struggle compared to that, but now it's non-physical, it is intellectual, I am doomed to defeat. My side, where I am now, my side, I see, will lose. If it were indeed a struggle. And if this indeed is the end of it, that I am going to lose. Me and everyone else. Me and even those that I can look at backward history now, that obviously, that you know, without me telling you about your imagination, that there are now people that I can see in backward history were in this struggle, and they lost. And I don't mean in some way that they were persecuted. They could have been, or maybe not have been historically noted. But at least they did not win. That is, what they knew, the new information they had, your contemporaries do not have. Plus that new information, you got to straddle both streams right quick, that new information did not stop them from dying. But it did not, the information itself did not change, did not complete the information in general held by humanity. So you would have to see at that level, if you're following this strange parallel fast enough, that metaphorically you are as doomed to defeat as the followers of the pagan myths were by evil. But in this case, instead of being physical evil, by the lack of the knowledge I have of how things work, I'm going to be defeated if it were a struggle. The question is, am I going to go out peacefully, passively, fearfully, or will I fight to the very end? Of course, the thing about doing this is, fight to the very end. That can sound great, like go out swinging, except there's nobody to fight. There are no ice giants. There are no Philistines. There are no Egyptians. I was trying to include all the possible religions historically. What you're fighting is the primed and wired power of thinking only what you have to think. And to go out fighting in the heroic sense, now not physical on a battlefield, but here is in my final breath, I'll be thinking stuff I don't have to. But you got to admit, with your final breath, that is your final thought, you would be a real intellectual hero, because if this is the end, if you thought almost anything other than, well, this is the end right then you would still go out fighting, that is, at the final moment. If you're thinking, I wonder what the weather will be tomorrow, when you realize I'll be dead in another 2 seconds. Now, what'll I wear tomorrow? That would be heroism. That would be a real revolutionist going out fighting to the very end. Fighting the inevitable. There is a slight, if not sidetrack, a little semi-parallel of a kind of curious linearity that you can find running from these earlier pagan religions, to use the same kind of examples I'm using, into the major Western religions and even the myths of chivalry. It really comes out. And it has to do with, using the same comparison, rather than these pagan heroes, even after they're dead, but the pagan heroes, not them just fighting defiantly an inevitable defeat. Rather than doing that, you have in the Jewish, Christian, Islamic, the myths of chivalry, you have this other notion of people involved with doomed battles, but it's on the basis that they in some way willingly sacrifice themselves. That a knight, a prophet, but take all the good chivalrous Anglo-Saxon Franco stories of men, small m, but of men willingly sacrificing themselves for another person or for a cause. Willingly, that is consciously, right? That is the notion, that is the energy behind these kinds of myths, are that people, to wit the ones in the myth, but they represent everybody, they had a choice. It was not simply Knight or Sir X over here who sees a photograph of a lovely woman. Don't ask me how you saw a photograph of a lovely woman in the 1300s, but he did, and he said, I've got to have her. And they said, well, she's being held by this huge, ugly, he thinks, dwarf. And they say, no, insurance salesman. Well, anyway. This horrible monster somewhere in a cave, and that no one can kill the monster. This great dragon. And he says, well, I'm going to go get her. He consults wise men, everything. In other words, the story even says it's inevitable. No one, no human can defeat this dragon. But then there turns out to be some story, or he suspects, or he's convinced, all right, if I can go over there, I can distract it long enough. I can't kill it. They've convinced me of that. I know it. But I can distract it long enough, and while I'm going down, I'll point to her, to run while I got that dragon, and so at least I'll sacrifice myself for her. If it wasn't for her, it could be for an idea package, for a new religion, for a cause of some kind. But the idea is here, the notion being here, is that the person in some way willfully did it. That they knew that they were going to fight or be involved with a predetermined losing battle. But they were prepared heroically to sacrifice themselves. Wherein, in the earlier stories, these pagan stories, there was no choice involved as to whether I'm going to engage in a losing battle. The only question was, will I go down passively, sort of yielding, fearfully, or will I go out fighting? But there is no even appearance that, well, I will align myself with this losing cause. I will willfully try to live a good life so I'll end up down there with Odin, or up there, or wherever he was. I'll end up there with him, so in the final big fight, wherein the good guys are going to lose, I'll be on the good side. No such story. There is no question. There seems to be no possibility within those older, or those pagan myths, that you could in some way have any choice as to whether you would become ultimately involved with an inevitable losing battle. But when you move into the newer religions, into the ideas, the myths of chivalry, to be involved with a losing, inevitable defeat was a form of sacrifice, that in some way you willingly chose to do it. You willingly agreed to do it, And of course the tacit, at the very least, the tacit implication being that you could have gotten out of it. Can any of you see that they have simply changed the job description? And you have to, of course, leave the sentence incomplete in those kind of myths, the kind of sentence I was just presenting to you. That is the kind of information that could be apparently feeding a particular nervous system of a particular person, to wit, all right, it is possible to sacrifice oneself. That is, to engage in a losing battle, but you do it willfully. You do it because you choose to. You do it consciously yourself. Because we are no longer driven or held by the kinds of fatalistic myths, such as, well, evil is going to triumph no matter what you do. But you got to leave that sentence actually unfinished, because you can't say, well, you can choose not to sacrifice yourself to go and be killed by that dragon just so that beautiful young girl can escape. You don't have to. And that seems to be the end of it. But the part of the sentence that's not finished is that no, you don't have to do that, but you're going to die anyway. I hope for more after that. I got to tell you the truth. Is it too obvious or too strange? All of the myths that appear to be non-fatalistic, all of the myths that seem to be the primary food for people of this part of life's body, this part of the planet, and this time, all of the major myths, whether they be called myths or not, those kinds of verbal energy packets are all involved with, there is some freedom of choice, that if you're going to do something that may cost you your life, that may cost you your health, that might cost you setbacks in life, some form of sacrifice, if you do it, it's not because you're made to do it, it would be because you undertook it. It would be because you were so heroically motivated, or that you were so inspired through spiritual, humanistic tendencies. But it leaves out the part that it doesn't matter, ultimately, whether you do that, whether you stand up for the sake of good, in the name of goodness, and say, well, that dragon should not have that fair young maiden. That's not fair. I know it's not fair, and the rest of you people know it's not fair. And they all look down kind of embarrassed. And I know I've heard, the head magician told me that no human can kill that dragon. But I asked him, well, what if I went over there and distracted it? Is there some rule somewhere, you damned old magician, know-it-all, that says she can't escape if I distract the dragon? The guy went, no, never heard of that. So, you know what that means? He asked, and the crowd still looks at their feet like, uh-oh. Nobody says anything. He says, well, I know what it means. It means that she can get away, even though we can't kill the dragon. That isn't. So, but it still seems to be that here, sacrifice, that is, of doing something that inevitably will lead to your defeat, has to come about by your own choice. But the sentence does not go ahead and say the rest of it. None of the religions say the rest of it. And if you tried to point it out, they would just say, well, that's irrelevant. In fact, they gave even better. They'd say it's not only irrelevant, that's why we have religion. If you said, well, wait a minute. If I make the sacrifice, that is, if I follow your religion, and I quit doing all the neat things I like, getting drunk and fornicating and lying and, coveting my neighbors, if I give up all that neat stuff, that is, if I get on the side of good, I make a sacrifice. But instead of this time trying to save a fair young maiden, you're trying to save yourself in some way or make yourself better. And you say, now if I give all that stuff up, you're saying then I'll be a whatever it is, a Jew or a Baptist. And they say, yes. And then you say, but wait, if I give all that up, am I going to die like everybody else? And they're going to have to say, well, yeah. And then they say, wait. You're saying if I make the sacrifice, if I choose to, I don't have to, but if I choose to make this kind of sacrifice, then am I going to be spared the ultimate defeat? And they have to, that is, am I going to die? And they say, well, now wait a minute. You're not asking right, because, yeah, you're going to die, but then you get reborn. And if you said, wait, why should I make the sacrifice? Because if I don't make the sacrifice, I'm going to die. In other words, people outside your religion, you say that your religion, which they all must, if you recall, they all must be exclusive. Everyone's mode of conduct and thinking in reality has got to be exclusive, or it's not going to be viable. So you say, all right, only people who pursue this general path are going to be on the side of good. They say, right. So everyone who is not a whatever it is, a Jew or a Baptist or a Muslim, then everyone who's not are doomed. They say, that's correct. Or else nobody would join. So you say, well, no, wait. So we've got the believers and then the pagans, in one sense of the definition of the word. And they say, right. And you say, well, let me ask you this. If I make the sacrifice and I quit being a pagan and I become this, will I not die? No, you're going to die. Well, no, wait before you say them. And so believers and non-believers both are going to die. Right. Then the question, well, why should I make the sacrifice? Why should I give up all the stuff I enjoy of taking God's name in vain and mistreating my parents and charging usury on my loans? Why should I give that up if I'm going to die like everybody else? Why should I make a sacrifice of my own volition if the same fate awaits me? Do you follow? But then they have to say, well, no. What you're trying to do is turn the whole basis of religion inside out. Because the only reason we have religion is so that it's not that way. Do you follow? Of course, you can forget all this stuff about you talking to somebody, the head of a religion. It's your own nervous system. It's yours and everyone else's. It's life's at this level of what should I do? What is the most profitable thing for me to do? What kind of energy, that is, what kind of these myths, one form of energy, feeds the nervous system best in man to make it grow and expand and be healthy and rosy-cheeked, optimistic, get up tomorrow and do all my work, knowing it's going to die. And so they would have to say, that is, that part of life's nervous system inside of life, in man's nervous system, would have to say, well, wait a minute, you're trying to say the least, misconstrue the purpose of religion. Because the whole purpose of religion is that you are going to die here. Now wait, don't interrupt me. Because yeah, you're going to die here. But if you do what we say, you end up with Odin, Jehovah, paradise, heaven. You end up not dead. And you can't go any further because then the nervous system just goes in a circle. This is not a theological argument. It's not an attack on religion. It goes nowhere. But before you get to that end of the sentence, where it seems to finish with people, is the idea that self-sacrifice, whether it be giving your life so that the maiden can escape from a dragon, or you're giving up what seems to be part of the joy of your life. You mean I'm going to quit drinking, give up cocaine, give up a wild sex life, and being greedy, and I'm going to give all that up, sacrifice myself, and then the bad guys are still going to win. You can't take it that far. That would be like eating, which myths and information is energy, it is food, but it'd be like eating and then immediately throwing up. What was the whole sense? There was no nourishment in it. There seemed to be an act, but it was moot. So why would I attempt to do that, which seems to be good by somebody's definition? Maybe an institutional definition. That is, this religion is good. Do this and you'll be on the side of good. But I'm still going down to ultimate defeat. No. I know it looks that way, but you're not. And you can't go any further because then you say, prove it. Show me one person. Show me one person kill somebody. Kill yourself right now, since you're the head. Let somebody kill you and then get back up. Now, I don't want to ruin your day, but if you'll do that for me, I'll seriously consider joining up. I mean, seriously. And nobody can. Because at that level, it is the end. At that level, death does win. The forces of evil do win. Loss does win insofar as three-dimensional consciousness can ordinarily perceive it. If that was the final word, then what I was trying to get you to see was the real revolution this is faced with, that all of this is simply rechanging the job description of trying to say, well, life is not fatalistic. Evil is not necessarily going to win because if you pursue these kind of dreams and myths and this kind of verbal information, verbal energy, such as Christianity, or if you pursue this, you make a sacrifice right now, but it pays off later. And the sacrifice is based, of course, they have redefined, reclothed, put on new fashion on the problem of free will by saying it's up to you. See, these old pagan myths, it wasn't up to you, because it didn't matter what the hell you did, evil was going to win. No matter what happened, you're going to be doomed. You and everyone else are finished. Remember, and it was more than just death. It was twice. You died and then you got killed later, finally. So, there has got to be progress, right? From those myths. From that kind of energy. Because energy now, which is a reclothing of it, is if you do something even at this level that seems to be inevitably doomed, you must choose to do it. It's sacrifice. It can be called now a Christian sacrifice. It can be called a Muslim sacrifice, a chivalrous sacrifice of you for an idea, for a cause, or for another person. But it is not fated. No, 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 because look how many people, the little scenario I made up, the guy said, hey, I found out that the dragon may kill us, but we might get that girl free. And all the people listening, I went through that thing that they, uh-oh. Notice they didn't volunteer in my story. They weren't fated to, right? They could stand around and they can make their own decision. Well, if that's true, do I have to go do it? No, I don't even know the girl. So now you have the kind of energies necessary for obvious needs of the general nervous system of humanity now. The stories now do not seem to be clothed, do not seem to be limited. And they even look back and refer to these myths now, that is, these energies, as pagan, simplistic, very low level, because they believed that people were fated, that even good people were going to finally lose in the end, and that a losing battle, a fool's errand, was every man's destiny. But now if you do something like that, you'd have to do it yourself. You would have to volunteer to do it. Does that not sound a lot better? And forget just the words, I'll put it another way. Does that not taste a lot better? Doesn't it feel a lot better? But well, maybe sometimes you have dreams of being Sir Galahad, and that you'd like to go out and fight a good fight even when you knew you would lose. But now that you are driven, now that you have the needs for the latter kinds of energy, you can confidently dream about it, or read a book about it, or watch Richard Burton and Camelot in a movie, and dream about it and go, but thank God I don't have to. You can just dream about it. But you are not forced now to involve yourself in any sort of sacrifice. Whereas, if you were driven by these old dreams, if you had been born 600 years too early, what if you believed all that crap? What if you believed that evil would win, that you were fated, inescapably fated to destruction and defeat no matter what you did? Boy, that'd give you the blues. I'm glad I live in the 20th century. Well, I'm glad for you. I got another quick one before we run out. It's as good a time as any. It's a real good time. That is my opinion. Consider, like, to what end his life arranged this particular situation in the midst of humanity. To what end? Why? To what purpose? Do experts insist to others that the talent, the gift that the expert has is no mere gift? They insist. Well, I guess humbly I will admit that I probably am considered to be one of the leading exponents, executioners, performers in this particular field. But I've got to tell you, it's no mere gift. That is, it's not. I know it may look like something. I'm up here and I get X amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars per night, and that people throw themselves at me, and I only work 2 shows a night, once a year, once a month. But, and if they don't go into these details, everybody understands what is being said, the energy that is attempting to be transferred from people. Say, wait a minute, this gift I've got is no mere gift. If they do not go into detail, everybody understands what they're actually saying. Is that, hey, when you people were out playing softball as a kid and playing with dolls, I was practicing the violin. I now still have to practice. Here I am at 40 years old, world famous. I must practice still 4 hours a day. If I go 2 days without it, I begin to lose it. In other words, this is no mere gift. To what end is life arranged that way? That yes, maybe I do have this gift, but it's no mere gift. No. Any of you that have a real fast nervous system, the closer you, or the further you move down to more primitive areas, if you're talking about that which apparently, or that which is closer to being just physical gifts, which then you're talking about people who are closer to the pagan needs than you are to more modern needs. They're more simplistic, more primitive people. That is, athletes, for instance, in our day and time. They come closer to saying, well, I can't take a lot of credit for being able to run the 100-yard dice in such and such time. It was like God gave it to me. It's a gift from God, right? I don't know how it is that I am the heavyweight champion and I can just beat the hell out of everybody. It's a gift from God. Of course, I got to take care of myself a little, and I continually give him the credit, but it's kind of a gift. So I know that. They've always, but you're talking about now people less driven by the higher end of the nervous system, which is not right or wrong, it's just a different game. It's a different part of life's body. But when you start getting past that area, which is of less and less consequence to humanity, into life, but when you get up into the areas that apparently becomes performing talent, artistic talent, intellectual talent, emotional talent, everything other than just the simple, well, I can beat the hell out of somebody, I can run faster than they can. When it gets past that point, this is just the rule. You're surrounded by it, you just didn't pay attention. When they admit to their gift, when they acknowledge that, yes, I do have this particular gift, but it is no mere gift. It is, I am strongly suggesting to you, even additional examples of uncoded messages going on from life. It is yet another redressing of the old question of free will. Consider all of the heroes and myths. What were they actually heroic about? I know that the further they go back and the more they're closer to the primitive people and the primitive times, even if it's in your own nervous system or somebody's right now, the heroes seem to be doing something physically. That is, fighting actual dragons or fighting evil people. But in a more complex way, what were these heroes of myths? Where they were heroic were that they were new thinkers. They had new information, but they were thinking in a new way is what made them heroic. Even in these stories, notice, before, I can't think of any myths wherein the hero said, wait a minute, this is no mere gift. But notice, without them saying it, they were still doing that, all the way from pagan myths up to Christianity and everything in between. That these heroes, that is, the people with new knowledge, new thinkers, they were of only two types. They were either born with it, and that made them superhuman, such as the Jesuses, or else they obtained it. If they were mere mortals, they obtained it here, but at great sacrifice and price to themselves. To what end is there no myth anywhere of a mere mortal, That is, without the old myths of, well, it's a piece of God, like the Jesus stories. That there are no mortals, that is, no tinge of supernatural, no mere mortals who acquired this knowledge in a fairly pleasant way. Did not seem to be any great sacrifice. It was not at some extreme hardship. You know, the stories, the Buddhist stories. No, there are no myths anywhere. Odin, what little, you know, even though he was facing the inevitable, any of you remember that? Not in just a pessimistic way, but the recording, the myth of some of what he went through makes some of those British romantic poets that I sometimes pick on and their negative self-pity, boy, it puts them things right outside. The man gave up all sorts of stuff. He'd have to give up an eye to get a new piece of information. He used to hang out on trees, some trees, barren trees out in the worst part of creation, for days at a time, hanging, blown by winds that no man had ever felt, just so he could learn a little bit more. And plus, you got to remember, he knew it wouldn't do him any good. Why are there no tales of people who became heroic, that is, new thinkers? Now forget all this stuff of flying through the air and stabbing dragons and evil spirits through the heart. The real heroism now is in the upper end of the nervous system. That is the revolution. That is the real exploration. That is the real deeds of heroic salvation. It's to save the unused part of your own nervous system, you individually. And so this is where it is. But the new thinkers, there have never been any tales of these heroes, people that could think new, who acquired it in some just fairly pleasurable way. To what end are those the stories? And notice the one, at least you got too lost in the final minute. Not only are there no stories of mere mortals that got it without great sacrifice, great prices extracted, health, family, almost everything. There's not only that, but the other possibility I pointed out at the ordinary level, there's also not this. There are no tales, there are no myths of people born with it that were apparently just mortal. That is, if you're going to take that there were people like a Jesus born with it, those kind of stories, then all right, he was born with it. He didn't suffer for it, he was born with it. And there are tales like this all over the world. He was just born with it. Of course. In other words, it was just a gift to him. But the man was not simply a mortal. He was another class. How come there are no tales then of a variation of that? That somebody was born with it, they didn't even acquire it, whether it took any great price or not, they were just born with it. Oh, and plus, they're just natural as hell. I mean, there's nothing unusual about them, they're just born with it. Remember, all of those with gifts are driven to say, wait a minute, this is no mere gift. Bye.